let's put everything in context. So let's go back to the Arab Spring. Alastair, there were widespread demonstrations in Syria, as there were throughout the Arab world. These were crushed very, very brutally by the Assad regime, which triggered the civil war. But let's start there.
Okay, well, with the Arab Spring, really its roots, if you want to go back to the roots of that whole process, was a meeting that took place with then Vice President Dick Cheney after the war in Lebanon, the 2006 war in Lebanon. And it entailed Prince Bandar, who was then head of Saudi intelligence services. And what happened at that meeting was that Cheney started moaning and saying, look, what's going on? You know, the invasion of Iraq was supposed to weaken Iran, and it doesn't seem to have done that. And now we've got a Hezbollah who has emerged victorious from this war in Lebanon. And Prince Bandar interrupted at that point, and he said, no, the king believes that the solution to this is we've got to take out Syria. Syria is the weak link in this whole process. And Cheney sort of backed off and he said, well, what do you have in mind? What are you talking about? And he said, well, there's a solution. It is, if you like, Islamic revolutionaries. They're the ones that can work for you. And again, Cheney sort of backed away a little, said, well, you know, United States can't do too much about that. You know, we wouldn't want to go too far on that. And Bandar said, no problem, we will do it all for you. It'll be done, you don't have to intervene, it will follow. And so this was a sort of second round. The first round had happened in Afghanistan, long before when I was there, when, of course, Saudi Arabia, at the behest of the United States, sent Islamist movements into what was a secular society in Afghanistan in order to bring it down to damage Russia and to weaken Russia at the point. And so this came up at this point, but you have to grasp the big geopolitical picture of what was happening. Saudi Arabia was proposing to invert the whole paradigm of the Middle East. In the 19th century and beyond, it was Iran, the Shah. It was a big, powerful country, and it was the leader in the Middle East. And what he was saying is, let's invert it. Let's isolate Iran and make the Sunnis paramount in the Middle East, give them the primacy. And so it was an attempt to sort of shift the whole balance around in a different way and to give the Sunni world, and this had been part of America's policy from 96 onwards, 1996, this idea of working with the Gulf states and with the monarchs and emirs of the Gulf against, then it was against Ba'athist regime and others, but then it was against Iran. And I remember, I mean, I was writing, you asked about the Arab awakening and what happened at that point. Well, it was, I think, really in about 2015 or earlier, I'm not sure if 12 or 13 even, that Obama signed the presidential finding, which is an order. I mean, it's an order that is given and was given to the CIA to oust Assad and to overturn the government there. And so ever since then, there have been a whole series of sort of three-letter, whole ragtag of three-letter groups that have received American training, Israeli training, Turkish training in Syria, mainly for the purpose of ousting Assad and fulfilling the finding, Obama's presidential finding. But even this started to fail, in my view. I remember I think it was around 2012, I wrote and I said things are shifting because what I see is this, we used to look at Palestine and we used to look at the Middle East through sort of secular eyes. Even albeit Orientalist eyes, but through secular eyes, we used to lose it and see it in sort of instrumental fashion. Palestine, it was about institution, construction, two-state solution. And I wrote even then that I thought this was shifting towards, if you like, symbols of religion. Al-Aqsa versus Temple Mount were going to be the new war that was coming. And gradually, if you like, the Saudis wore out their interests in Wahhabism, extreme form of very narrow religion, of Islamic religion, based on texts and on a document which was known quite obviously as a management of savagery. And this was the turning point, really. I think it was starting to shift in the other direction. And now Saudi Arabia has almost completely got rid of, if you like, the Wahhabi influence. Other parts of the Gulf have become more, what I call, more interested in Bloomberg and their stock market ratings than they are in the geopolitics of the region. So that is the shift. Now, what's happened essentially with this is an expansion of Obama's finding, because gradually the most severe sanctions, the Caesar sanctions, were imposed on Syria from the beginning. And then the Kurds were empowered in the northeast of Syria, and they sat on the Syrian oil fields. And that oil was taken from them and sent Turkey, and it was entirely an illegal operation. So Syria lost its oil revenues. And then later, the Turks came down into the western part of Syria, occupied Idlib and took Aleppo. That was the industrial part. And so the agricultural, the oil industry, there was no economy left. Just to give you a practical example now, where we've seen that the Syrian army sort of were declined to fight. A conscript in the Syrian army is currently paid $7 a month. A general in the Syrian army receives $40 per month. The HTS and the others of the militia receive $2,000 a month. That is the state in which, really Syria just didn't have, for one thing, the resources to seemingly be able to put together an army or fight. Russia tried to do this in 2018. It said to Assad, we'll remake your army, re-equip it, new equipment, we'll train them, the latest things, on credit. You don't have to put money up. Assad said no. Then more lately, the Iranians have said to them, we can support you. We can support your army. We can help. But you have to invite us. We can't come in as an occupying force. We have to be invited. Assad said no. And throughout this period, he has been warned that something was coming. The Iranians, the Quds Brigade of the IRGC, about 2 months ago went to Assad and they said to him, something is happening in Idlib. Beware, watch out. And I imagine that the Russians were equally aware of this. And the Turks have now publicly said, that this was on the cards. They were operating this 6 months earlier. It started from their perspective 6 months earlier. I would actually put the date for the preparation of this for 2 years ago, probably. But anyway, they openly say 6 months ago, it was underway, being prepared. And being prepared, obviously, with America and being prepared with Israel. Now, why did he say no? Now, I don't have an answer that is definitive of this, but I remember some years ago, I remember well that I had, there was a discussion, and I know the details of it, that when MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, was sort of new on the stage and young. MBZ from the Crown Prince of UAE were talking, and he said, listen to Mohammed bin Salman, if you want to be Crown Prince, the path to being Crown Prince is through Israel, and it's through the Israeli lobby in Washington. That's what you need to do, and that's, of course, what UAE had done already with its base in Washington and presenting itself in ways to America. And I think what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is we've seen actually that Assad was distancing himself from both Iran and from Russia. And I think that he was being pulled more and more by the Gulf states, thinking that if he approximated closer to the Gulf states and away from Iran and Russia, this was his path to sort of survival, because Washington would like that. But more importantly, Tel Aviv would like that, and that would work with him in that way. Well, in the end, there was nothing left to work with. So Erdogan, who had been for months, years, trying to persuade Assad to allow his government to be, if you like, I can only describe it as a sort of controlled Ottoman structure, rather than a government of the Syrian people. And I remember he was pressing it very hard at one time when I was with Assad in Damascus. And Assad said, look, you know, these people like Hamas and the Muslim Brothers who are guests in my country, and we've helped, funded, supported them, you know, now telling me how to run the country and that they want the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's a very sensitive issue, the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, I'm sure you know, because of the affairs with Hams and
well, we should just explain for people who don't. There was an uprising. I think his father, Hafiz al-Assad, at least he raised the city, 10,000 dead. You can explain the context of that. And it was a Ba'athist secular regime, Baathism coming out of Nasser. Saddam Hussein was a Ba'athist. But just explain, going back that history, why they were so terrified of the Muslim Brotherhood, as, of course, was other rulers like King Hussein.
They saw the Muslim Brotherhood as a very strict Islamist movement whose tail, and there's some truth to this, veered off into sort of Wahhabism and Salafism. That was certainly true in Gaza and elsewhere. But Erdogan tried to take control of the Muslim Brotherhood because he wanted to present, as I've just said, you know, that whereas Cheney was empowering the kings and emirs of Sunni Islam to be the masters of the world, Erdogan wanted to go back to Ottomanism, a form of neo-Ottomanism. And everyone feared that. No one liked the Ottomans, basically, outside of the Ottoman world. And he wanted to insert that. And Assad saw this as a huge danger, and that this was going to be a militant attack on the state. But during that period after this, I mean, the state has become weaker and weaker and weaker. And so when, if you like, when Russia said, well, we can try and build up your army and try and make you stronger, I don't think he had the resources. Don't think he had even, you know, when you're paying your troops $7 a month, you know, you just don't have many resources. The people were starving, they were losing hope, and there was a lot of corruption. You can imagine soldiers on $7 a month, you know, stop the people at the checkpoints and demand money from them, and that sort of thing was going on. And then he was being dragged towards the Gulf states, thinking this might be a solution for him. And then Erdogan decided to mount, if you like, this coup. through Idlib, using a motley group of militias and others, and those that are loosely tied to ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And I think that what happened was because he went to see President Putin on the day before, Friday, I think it started Saturday. And he spent some time with President Putin, hours, and then flew back the same day. And we have no idea what was said at that meeting. There's no record of it from the Kremlin side, and there's no record on the Damascus side of it. But I think that was probably the point. Putin said, "I'm sorry, Assad, it's game over. There's going to be a change, and you're going to have to work with it." So I think from the Astana, from the meetings between Iran, Turkey, and Russia had come to the conclusion on two grounds that, first of all, this was going to be a terrible mess if Assad fell. And I think he was probably being advised that this is almost inevitable outcome. The situation was becoming irreversible. So I think in one sense he could see that this would be a terrible mess, yes. But at the same time he recalled Afghanistan. And at the same time he knew that one of the plays that is in hand against Russia is to weaken it, to give ways of pulling it from its focus on Ukraine and the war there, to create new fronts, new pressure points, more pressure on Assad. And that he decided, what is the primary interest of Russia? The primary interest is not the small wars, the big war, not Romania, not Belarus, not Moldavia, but the big war, which is against, if you like, NATO and the West, which wants to, if you like, peel him away from China, peel him away from Iran, scatter the BRICS across the globe, and leave Russia isolated. And so I guess he decided that was to be the case. And Iran were very clear. Larijani went to see Assad well before the actual collapse and said, to say, look, it's coming, you're going to go. There's no way the army is going to protect. And I think, I know that Larijani, he wouldn't even see him. And then he told him he was wrong. And I just think that at that point, it was all over. And so Russia and Iran and Erdogan got together and they produced this document. Of course, it's all diplomatic speak. It has got no real meaning. It talks about elections and a ceasefire and everyone is going to stop and get together and come and the legitimate opposition must be included and HTS excluded. All this is fiction. Of course, it's never going to happen.